Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the OverSeers. My name's Proelios, and I'm joined as usual by my co host Nightwing. The regular season games of the season are all over, and the Overwatch League is once again set to go into the play in and playoffs mode, where we'll finally get to know who our 2022 Overwatch League champion is going to be. Before we get to talking about the Overwatch League, we do want to mention uh, the Heroes Recall Tournament, which has been organized for content creators from 6 different countries, has been announced by, I think, the Overwatch League or the Path to Pro. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, Nightwing, why don't you just walk us through what this whole tournament's going to be about?
Yeah, so as far as I understand, this is a tournament that's going to be for content creators. It's technically headed by uh, EGL, Esports Gaming League, which is a good departure from the monotony of only Blizzard serving us any tournaments. I think this does provide a good opportunity for different sort of league creators and tournament creators, such as they've got in the CS scene as well as Valorant. Um, because eventually you do need some sort of third party interest to keep everything going. It's Blizzard cannot organize every single tournament like they did in Overwatch 1, and that wasn't really successful. So I think this is a really good move. Some teams and some players from particular countries have been snubbed since obviously there are only 6 teams, and people, for example, from Eastern Europe and Spain are complaining that there's not a lot of representation in the EMEA region, um, which is definitely a little bit unfortunate. That said, this is like a pretty big prize pool, so it also does make sense that they would want to limit that those winnings to a particular set of people. I think it's a bit of a complex situation. I would have definitely liked to see more representation, but that said, I think it's uh, still overall a good sign that we're trying to run these sort of tournaments, especially in the EU region, since a lot of gaming content is usually exclusively limited to North America. So I think this will be fun to watch. We've also side by side got the Kiriko drops going on, so I think it goes to show that Overwatch 2 is overall fairly successful so far. You've got consistently over 200K viewers all the time on Twitch these days, when we used to struggle to get even 10 or 15K um, for Overwatch 1. So I think this is a good start, and we have sort of made up some lost ground because of the DDoS launch, obviously. So I think overall it's still looking positive for Overwatch 2, even if there are a few hiccups here and there.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I remember a couple of months ago there was a situation where you would see a comparison between chess and Overwatch, with chess having like 2,000 more viewers than Overwatch, which was just really sad to see. So I'm glad that like finally Overwatch viewership has gone up once again, and this tournament and others like it are sure to kind of bolster those numbers and you know affect more and more people across the global gaming community. So all right, let's move on and talk about the main meat of today's discussion, which is the play-ins. And we've already finished off the APAC play-ins, which just consisted of 2 matches. So we had the Guangzhou Charge and the Chengdu Hunters face off against each other. The Chengdu Hunters took the win and moved on to play the Hangzhou Spark, to whom they lost in pretty Chengdu fashion and got knocked out of contention for the championship. So the Hangzhou Spark are the fourth seed going into the playoffs, and they will be joining Shanghai, Philly, and which is the Seoul. My bad. Shanghai, Philly, and Seoul in California. So, what are your thoughts on the Hangzhou Spark at the moment, Nightwing? Because I would have expected the Chengdu Hunters to actually beat the Spark, given how consistent they are. Sorry, given how inconsistent they are. But they did pull off some really interesting maneuvers, putting in Pineapple on that tracer and playing him alongside Shy.
I think there's definitely something to be said about uh, Hangzhou being a genuinely good team that is sort of misguided because they've definitely got the right parts to make it work. I mean, they have some genuinely impressive players. Players like Bernard, who had sort of given up on, have consistently shown that they are actually fairly capable. It's just that it's not something they're able to execute all of the time. I think Pineapple on the Tracer was definitely fun to watch. It's something that they've not leaned into very hard in the past. Shy obviously is just goated. There's no two ways around it, and obviously, players like Alpha E were promising prospects as well. Even though Pineapple played for the play-ins, I think the Hangzhou Spark have always had a good amount of potential in them. They've also got Super Rich, who was basically up there with Chorong with the preseason hype. It's just that because of Hangzhou's inconsistency, uh, Super Rich hasn't really been able to express himself as well. But he is still a really good, rookie prospect, as you've seen demonstrated in the league. So I think it does make sense that Hangzhou overall is a bit better. I think Chengdu, over the years, they've sort of rested on their laurels and they haven't really, I think, adapted to Overwatch 2 very well. Um, there's only so much Leaf can carry, right? Despite him being last year's MVP and everything. So I think it's perfectly fair that the Hangzhou Spark do actually get away with this. I think their supports are definitely a little more active. Um, even though I don't have the most faith in Teru so far, he has been showing that he can make it work with the Spark, and that is demonstrated in the results. I think either way, it would have been a close call if you asked me a couple of weeks ago, but currently we live in a world where the Hangzhou Spark is in, so that's perfectly fine with me.
Yeah, definitely. The team has had a few switch ups during the season, right? Like they completely replaced the back line of Irony and Super Rich with Teru and Neko. So that was a completely new look for them because those two aren't players that you would expect to see in these roles. Um, and right now, I think it's good that they are just playing to their strengths. They realize that they have a true tracer star in Pineapple. They are playing Teru on Ana most of the time, and Shai is playing his now signature hero Sojourn to a really high level. So the team's starting to show their actual true colors. They've started putting Gushua back in a little bit. He's coming in exclusively on the Winston, whereas they have Bernard for the Diva and the Zarya, and the rest of the team just adapts to whatever these players are playing, right? So it's a good look. I just hope they can maintain it because they haven't been the most consistent team in the APAC region so far. But yeah, all the best to them. Hopefully they put up a good showing during the playoffs. Let's now talk about the NA play-ins, which are still to come. And how they're going to work is we are going to see 5 matches in total. It's going to be almost like a double elimination bracket. Um, the first team to get 2 straight wins is basically going to qualify for the playoffs directly, whereas the other one has to beat like all of the remaining teams in order to go. It's something like that. But essentially, we have got 4 teams: the Toronto Defiant, the Washington Justice, the Boston Uprising, and the Florida Mayhem, who are going to play in this bracket. And 2 of these teams will qualify for the playoffs. So the first match is going to be Mayhem versus Uprising. The second one will be Defiant versus Justice. And then, based on the winners and losers, we'll get the rest of the bracket to watch. So let's just go over these teams one by one and see what their chances of qualifying for the playoffs actually are like. Starting off with the Toronto Defiant. Now, Nightwing, do you have any initial thoughts on Toronto as a team, like based on their strength at the moment, their consistency, and just their chances of getting into the playoffs?
Honestly, I think the Toronto Defiant have always had it in them, but they've also always just faltered randomly. And sometimes they've just surprised us with what they can, come up with. That said, like they are mathematically mid in the entire regular season, and that just goes to show what I think of them. I think it's pretty much 50-50. I think um, teams that will just end up throwing and teams that do end up going into the into the playoffs after the play-ins is basically just a toss-up between any of the teams, to be honest. between the Florida Mayhem, Toronto Defiant, Boston, and Justice. I think there's just no real way to tell, to be perfectly honest. I think any of them could show up on any particular given day. That said, Toronto does have, I think, the best structure around them. Uh, Probably the least number of actual weaknesses. It's just that their performance hasn't quite been there. Um, I think if Toronto does get their stuff together, they do definitely have the most consistent way of uh, getting into the playoffs, because I think the other teams are still a little bit unpredictable, and that means Toronto can just exploit their, in my opinion, better structure overall as a team to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, so far the Defiant have like clearly understood where their strengths lie again, which is mainly with the Tracer Sombra composition. They have the Sombra god Hisu on their team, and they either play Aldo or Finale on the Tracer, and I believe Aldo handles the Genji for the team as well. And naturally, they've got Twilight, who is one of the best Anas in the region. So they are definitely exploiting his skill set well as well. But we are seeing a bit of a toss up with Batiste coming back into the meta a little bit because Diva is just too strong against Ana. So BAP just deals a bit more poke damage to Diva and like deters her from actually diving your squishies. And the Defiant have been a little bit weaker at that BAP Lucio look, in my opinion. They do play it alongside Hotbar Zarya, but like overall, I think the Ana is definitely where their strengths lie, be it alongside Hotbar's Diva, Hotbar Zarya, or even Muse's Winston. So as long as they stick to that formula, I think they can pull it off because they are a pretty how do you say this? You can generally tell which matches they're going to win and which ones they're going to lose by now at least. But they do just like randomly show up on a given day or just play a completely like mid game on another. So we'll see where they go. I frankly wouldn't um, be too hopeful as a Defiant fan about their chances qualifying into the playoffs. But let's go over the other teams and find out whether or not Nightwing thinks the same way. So moving on to the Boston Uprising, this is one team that has been on the up and up. Um, they are also playing the Tracer Sombra composition a lot, but they're playing it mainly alongside M Series Zenyatta, which I think seems to be the core focus because you can see the team generally just playing at angles or positions which would favor M Series Zen, where you can play for picks, and MCD definitely has the mechanics to do that. So I think it's a good strategy to lean into, and Punk's off tank play has been pretty good as well. So I honestly feel like the Uprising have a pretty good chance of making it through this bracket and into the playoffs. But we'll have to see because they didn't necessarily have a very strong strength of schedule. They were just really consistent, but against mid tier or lower tier teams. So let's see if they can maintain this against these three challengers and if they can actually make it.
I was actually fairly surprised with um, how decent Seeker's Sojourn was. I think that's not something I really expected, but actually watching it, I think he was like fairly capable on that hero. And that is like a hero that is just an insane difference maker. If you go and look at the top 500 leaderboards that are out, I think literally today in Overwatch 2, you can see that everyone that's in top 500 on the damage roll is all like all of them are just one tricking Sojourn almost, because that's just the strongest hero in the game right now. So I think that is something that can give them an advantage. Um, but I think overall as a team, the Boston Uprising also do have, like you said, a good team formation around that MCD Zen. But they can also play obviously the sort of Bap Lucio comp, which I think is something that seems to be working for them somewhat. Um, So I think that the Boston Uprising can definitely turn it around and be a little more surprising than one would expect out of them.
Yep, and another team that has kind of defied expectations this stage has been the Florida Mayhem because they had a pretty rough start to the stage. They didn't really understand how to play in this meta. They were trying to just play their comfort picks, but realized that, for example, someone needed to be a little bit more flexible, and he has been working on those off-tank roles, and because of that, the team has been able to transition from playing just like those Vincent compositions to showing actually a bunch of different looks, with kind of the dominant being the Zarya comps as of late, because Zarya Bap Lucio has started to become pretty good. So you do see the someone Zarya coming out. And I must say, Hydron on the Sojourn is looking pretty fantastic as well. So it's going to be a very fun run for the Florida Mayhem. I do enjoy watching them as a team. If whether or not they qualify in these brackets remains to be seen, but they do look like they're on the rise. So I wouldn't put it past them to come up with a surprising victory against any of these teams, even though they may not look like the strongest one out of the four. Like, I honestly don't know because I've heard a lot of different opinions about how this bracket is going to play out. So I'm not sure how you think, Nightwing, but I think the Mayhem have a decent chance, but I'm not super confident in them yet.
I think I would be a lot more confident in Mayhem were we in the beginning of the season, but the fact that the Mayhem has just not been able to really show up in sort of the middle and the latter half of the season is a little bit concerning to me. They had a good start, but then after that, I feel like they just kept losing over and over again. Um, that said, they do have like really good pieces, and they like if you look at someone like um, Checkmate is someone that I did not believe in whatsoever going into the season, but he actually did play really well when it came down to it. And Hydron has also been really impressive, really good hit scan in his own right, and he has been for many, many years, even in contenders, and that's why he dominated over there, and that's why he's on an overseas team now. Um, Rupal has been, another player that has actually sort of stepped up. I think is one of the only players from the Mayhem that have stepped up in the latter half of the season where I think he's finally getting there. He's able to play the BAP, and that seems to be working for him, honestly. He's been getting 5Ks here and there as well, uh, on the down low without anyone really noticing or calling it out. So I think they definitely have other pieces that they can work with. It's just that given their track record, I'm not really sure how much to count on that. Uh, Obviously, yeah, someone also flexing to the Zarya is something that is honestly required of him because Zarya is really, really strong right now. Uh, Newsflash, it wasn't just Hanbin that was good on Zarya. It's just that the hero itself is also really, really good on, by its own merit. So I think it's good that they're trying to adopt other compositions because just running that same comp over and over again is not really something that's going to work out in a professional setting, especially when the entire game is still built around counter swapping. So I think overall the Florida Mayhem do have a decent chance, like you said, Proelius. But I think pretty much it's just a coin flip on who gets in. To be honest, I don't think I particularly favor any one team getting into the playoffs.
Yeah, no, that's fair, honestly. And speaking of another team that has a bunch of different looks, we've got the Washington Justice as the final team in discussion. So they once again are another team that loves to run that Tracer Sombra because naturally they are two of their DPS players' signature heroes. Assassin Sombra and Decay's Tracer are both really solid, and that's why it makes me really confident in the Washington Justice in this meta. Although they are not the most consistent team either, um, I do feel like that Tracer Sombra core is what can definitely propel them towards the playoffs. They do have Krillin's reliable Ana on their side as well, and opener can flex to the Zen or Lucio, or some at times Krillin picks up the Zen as well, and naturally you've got Kalios playing either the Diva or the Zarya because he's the off tank player, right? Um, all in all, I have been liking that the team has just been focusing on a couple of different compositions, because like they do sometimes run a couple of variants here and there, But primarily it's either the Zarya Lucio or the Diva Zen, along with the Ana Teresa Sombra. And it's good that you're polishing up a composition that really plays to your strengths, and then having a couple of pieces just to round it off nicely. So they are relying on their DPS players to be the playmakers, and so far it has been working out well for them. So I do have a lot of faith in the Justice. I think they can definitely make it to these playoffs if they continue playing as they already have been this stage.
I think honestly, the difference maker for me is surprisingly not the DPS. I think Kalios is the difference maker, just because I think out of all of these teams, Kalios is probably the best tank and the most flexible tank in my eyes. I think I've liked his gameplay on pretty much like every tank he's swapped to, more or less, and that is something that I think does not really apply to many of these other tank players in these play-in teams. I think he has like just impressed me with his gameplay, even though the team hasn't been super successful. I think Kalios is really solid, and I think that might be sort of a difference maker. I'm not, completely sold on the support line, to be honest. They have been doing okay here and there. I feel like that's one of their biggest weaknesses. I'm also not really loving the Assassin Sombra always, but he is able to make do with it, here and there. So I think overall this team does stand a good chance, maybe slightly a higher chance than the other teams, but I think it's still a complete toss-up.
Oh yeah, definitely. But just from the general look of it, Nightwing, which two teams would you think would qualify for the playoffs?
Yeah, I think I would probably look at the Justice getting in just because I do like Kalios's gameplay. And the other team I'd look at is still the Toronto Defiant. Uh, Even though I think really any of them could beef hard and uh, you know, you would be none the wiser because all of these teams have just disappointed, honestly, a lot of their fan base. Um, and so I think it's really possible for any of them to either flop on a particular given day, or just take it away with multiple wins. So I think it'll just come down to the wire and basic fundamentals uh, of what the team is able to execute with. I think probably I would yeah go for the Justice and maybe the Toronto Defiant.
I think Justice as well, but I think the Boston Uprising possibly have a higher chance than the Defiant at the moment. Just because I feel like the Defiant completely whiff it sometimes. They don't exploit openings within the enemy team. They don't really go aggressive that much. They give the enemy team like a lot of how do you say? They give them a lot of room to make plays, which does not really sit well with me at the moment. So that's why I think it's the Uprising and the Justice. The Mayhem could be a bit of a dark horse, but I still need time to get, have more faith in them, just because they have historically, in this stage and the previous one, been an inconsistent team. So I do have a lot of faith in Hydron's Sojourn. I think Checkmate is also a really good DPS player to back him up. And honestly, the team doesn't look half bad, but it's just, a matter of like who's better. And right now, I think it's Boston and Washington. So that's that. And the one final topic we did want to address was that there's seemingly going to be a new patch uh, for the Overwatch League teams to play on um, for the playoffs. And they are going to get access to that patch just like roughly 1 week prior to the playoffs, which is a little bit problematic because a lot of these teams rely on um, you know, having several weeks to strategize and uh, form a proper game plan, see where the team strengths lie and what actually the best hero combinations are. But this time it's going to be a bit of experimentation for all of these teams because the NA and the APAC teams are going to have like equal amounts of time to play on the patch, and they have very little time to actually read the lay of the land and um, decide what's meta. So, Nightwing, what are your thoughts on like the delay? of not the delay, but just the fact that there's suddenly an announcement of a patch, and that the teams have such little time to prepare for it.
I mean, this is classic Overwatch League. This is just how Blizzard treats Overwatch League every single year. It's not really surprising at this point. Uh, it happens. I think it's happened in I think 3 or 4 out of the 5 seasons we've had so far. So it's just hilarious at this point and should be expected. Uh, I think you should be more surprised if this does not happen at this point. Uh, but yeah, Blizzard's main goal I think is just get the conversation going to increase viewership. Uh, so they've sort of added a new meta. Um, they'll probably try and make Kiriko more viable and show her off, as they have with Junker Queen as well as Sojourn. Obviously, they're just trying to get these Overwatch 2 heroes into the limelight, and I think that's what they'll continue to do. We don't really know the specifics of the patch so far, but I'm guessing, based off the comments that players have made to journalists like at GG Recon, uh, just that the like Blizzard Entertainment wants uh, Kiriko and just the new heroes in a better spotlight. So I think you can reasonably expect that uh, they will be buffing heroes like Kiriko, and you'll just be seeing a sort of different composition come out of that. Um, I'm not really super happy about this in terms of in a competitive setting, but I can also see that the Overwatch League as well as especially Blizzard are trying to get more eyeballs onto the Overwatch League and Overwatch 2 as a product as a whole, and that's why they're moving forward with getting in third parties for uh, these streamer tournaments. They're trying to put in Twitch drops. They're trying to also change up the meta in Overwatch League so that more people are inclined to watch it. So I think this is something that if you're signed as an Overwatch League player at this point, you should just expect, considering it happens almost every time. Um, so I don't think it's particularly out of the blue, even if it was sort of sprung on them this year as well. So I think at this point you should just be expecting going forward in pretty much every Overwatch League season that Blizzard is going to pull stuff like this. They are just extremely focused on getting the product out and making it more popular at the moment, which I don't think is inherently wrong. It's just that the competitive integrity of the league and the highest possible level of play that you can provide does sort of go down because of this, because teams have less time to adapt. But to be perfectly honest, this is less egregious than what Blizzard has done in the past, um, and what the Overwatch League has done in the past. If you remember the whole hero bans scenario, where pretty much every single week or every 2 weeks you would have some heroes completely unplayable, and thus uh, certain compositions would become completely uncounterable. That's something that did actually happen in the past, even though it seems crazy to think of now from a competitive integrity standpoint. I think if you just compare it to that and compare it to Blizzard's overall track record with this, it's not really super surprising that they would do this sort of thing. Hopefully, it's just not boring to watch. That's all I can really hope for, and that genuine skill instead of uh, just an insane amount of passive healing is what will drive the composition. That's all you can really hope for, and that genuinely deserving teams that have adapted the best and have the most skilled players can actually make it through and win the finals.
Yeah, very well said over there. Because I do think that this is going to be a bit problematic for teams that take a little longer to adapt to new metas. Um, I think the Shanghai Dragons are a pretty classic example of that because, at least for the past couple of years, they've needed 1 or 2 games to kind of warm up and settle in into the new meta before they can truly start popping off. And this year, we've actually seen a bit of that from the San Francisco Shock as well. So I would be a little bit concerned for these two teams, but ultimately, they are some of the best in their respective regions. So we should still expect them to, advance a decent bit. Um, I do think that as long as these changes don't make the meta stale and that they actually enable heroes that require a lot of mechanical skill and are fun to watch, this is still an okay move. Obviously, it's not ideal. I would still have, given the team a new, given each team the new patch like a couple more weeks in advance. But I think as long as the compositions and the heroes that are being played are fun to watch, and uh, like actually either one of these conditions needs to be satisfied. Either multiple heroes and multiple compositions need to be viable, or the heroes and compositions, if they are just fixed, then they need to be interesting to watch. Like, for example, I would rather be stuck in a meta in which, like Sigma, Zarya, Diva, all of these heroes are viable, or even if, let's say, just one, like we saw in the Summer Showdown, right? Just the Junker Queen composition existed. That was really boring to watch because it was just who gets more healing, who uses their resources better. It's just the same match every single game. Like that's not what we really want to watch. If you're going to give us just five fixed heroes that you can play, give us something like give us a Roadhog. Honestly, give us a Genji, give us a Tracer, give us Zenyatta, give us Kiriko. Like that would be really fun to watch. Something just really stupid like that. Because historically we have seen Hog in half of the playoffs, right? So we might see him again. Who knows? They did say that they're going to deal with a lot of heroes that are good right now. So we are going to see a bunch of nerfs coming in. So maybe we do see some of the lesser played heroes. Maybe we see the Bastion. Who knows? But should be a fun watch either way. Um, all right, I think that about concludes it for all of our topics. Are there any closing thoughts you have, Nightwing?
I think it's just going to be fun to see which of these teams gets into the playoffs and then gets immediately just rolled by the significantly better teams, in my opinion. So, you know, you can have fun seeing these teams for right now, but unless they have an insane dark horse run and some of the better teams do actually just insanely beef it, you won't actually see these teams go very far. So I think just enjoy the multiverse of midness that you're about to see in these play-ins, because I don't think you'll see these teams make it very far into the playoffs. Uh, but yeah, I would love to be surprised. Also, just look out for Kiriko, I guess, once we get into the playoffs. But we'll talk about that when actually the balance patch that's going to happen is finalized. Obviously, there is going to be a shake-up. Teams will take some time to adapt, but I think any team that's still got a solid coaching staff, such as Dallas or maybe Shock, uh, and some of the others, if they've got a good shoulder on their heads, they should be able to figure out pretty much any meta that comes their way.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's going to be crucial to see which team actually ends up adapting to the meta really fast because either teams can spend more time trying to figure out a few optimal compositions, or, and we have seen this before, they will just stick to their comfort picks and figure out which of their comfort picks are actually still somewhat meta. So I would imagine, for example, someone like the Shanghai Dragons being okay with having a couple of close games but still winning them just to figure out what the meta is and then countering it. Whereas the Dallas Fuel won't really care about the meta, they'll just care about what their signature heroes are and which ones can they actually play. And that's it, they'll just bust those out. So, really interesting approaches to be seen all around. And if you guys have any thoughts on this patch or any of the topics that we discussed, feel free to use the comment section down below. We can talk about this more in detail if you join our Discord server, which I'll also link in the description. And yeah, that about concludes it for this episode. Bye bye, and we'll see you on the other side of the NA play-ins.